Are you afraid of death?
Yeah.
Me too. And there's no way out of it. You're going to die. I'm going to die. It's going to happen. And what difference does it make if it's tomorrow or in 80 years? Much sooner in your case. Do you know how fast time goes? I was 6, like yesterday.
Me too.
I'm going to die. You are going to die.
Death. Every now and then, we all have a think about dying or being dead, and it's a really scary and intense idea, and it makes you feel dreadful, fearful and anxious. It's understandable that people don't want to think about themselves dying or their loved ones dying. But I'm going to explain why thinking and talking about dying is so important to each and every one of us. And by the end of this video, and after a bit of reflection, you should fear dying less, as it will be less of an unknown. And I'm sure I'll drive home the point that
death is coming.
Death is outside.
There's no escape.
Death is going to happen to each and every one of us. I guess it's right that we don't worry unnecessarily about dying, but for many, their fears of death are stoked by conscious or subconscious guilt about their unhealthy lifestyle, be it smoking or a sedentary lifestyle. So yeah, let's not worry unnecessarily about death, it's unhelpful. But that's not to say we should ignore the concept of death, dying, and the realities of our very existence in our unpredictable lives. To ignore this reality is to enter this eventuality of yourself or your loved one dying mentally unprepared. You're also denying yourself the opportunity to consider what is important to you should you become unwell, disabled, or you couldn't communicate for yourself due to your illness. There's many different things that are important to people when they're dying, and most people know what they'd want should they become seriously ill or disabled with a terminal illness, but our society doesn't foster these conversations, and it's too little too late when we leave these ideas till death's door. For example, dying at home, which takes a lot of preparation and identification and acceptance of someone approaching their last weeks of life. We have little control over why or when we die, but being mentally and physically prepared will allow you control over the controllable factors around dying. As people leave this world into the next, wherever it is, people want to go out on their terms, and they find peace in the environment or situation that will allow them to focus on this important stage in their life. As people leave this world into the next, whatever it is, people want to go out on their terms and find peace in an environment or situation that will allow them to focus on this important stage in their life. An important reason people have a less good death is because they're in denial, or struggling to accept that it's their time simply because they've been in denial about their mortality for such a long time, allowing their subconscious anxieties about their ill health to get progressively worse till their time comes, when it all spills over. This is why facing your mortality whilst you're healthy, or importantly when you're unwell as well, will help you appreciate what's important in death, but also life. I've helped hundreds of patients and families through the dying experience. I have a great passion and excellence for end-of-life care in my patients, and I take a great care and pride in proper communication and discussion of what people want in their dying phase. I've learned that although attitudes and the culture around dying has improved simply by our population ageing and people dying less prematurely, these improvements are not enough, and end-of-life care has a very long way to go, and it's relatively new concepts that has really emerged in the last few decades in mainstream general medicine. Alright Zaid, you need to take a chill pill, mate. This is all a bit much for me. I'm in my 20s, 30s, I'm busy living, not worrying about dying. Well, I want to start a dialogue at least, and get people thinking about the subject, if not at very least to be more knowledgeable for when someone you know is dying one day, and you need to be there for them. Also, I think by the end of this video, you will fear death far less simply by learning that it's actually a relatively natural and peaceful process for most people, and it's comfortable generally. Dying in 2021 is as good as it's ever been in the history of the universe, and slipping away with a, pain-killing pump doesn't really compare to getting eaten alive like an animal in the wild. These days we have hospital and community palliative care, a better understanding and attitude amongst doctors regarding end-of-life care, but also people living longer and longer with long-term illnesses, leaving them more time to see their health deteriorate and become more accustomed to the idea of their mortality. They become more mentally resilient, and although it will always be difficult for some people when their time comes, for a lot of people it's a lot easier. Another good reason for you to face your mortality is, for some of you, smokers, compulsive eaters, facing this idea may be what it takes for you to become motivated enough to follow through on quitting smoking or living a healthy lifestyle. Lastly and importantly, come to terms with the idea that you might die at any time. You'll learn to live every day like it could be your last. In my job, seeing so many people die, it makes me realise how I need to crack down on all these little projects like I'm doing now and sort my life out. And to all the youngsters, statistically, some of you are going to die young, and it could be at any moment. So now that I've broken the ice, what is dying? Well, for the most part, dying is essentially a process whereby an organ or several organs are failing to the point which just isn't compatible with life, and it results in your other organs slowly deciding to shut down. Towards the end of this process, you become sleepier and sleepier as your brain shuts down until you go into a natural coma, and eventually your breathing and your heart rate slows down and comes to a stop. Dying isn't just an organ failing and an illness killing you, it's actually a physical and mental process, a biological process whereby your organs shut down in an orchestrated event. Some of the first signs I look for when someone might be dying is whether or not they're refusing food and drink, medications, observations, treatments. And yes, someone who's confused, they may do these things, but you get a certain sixth sense when you're a doctor. And if a doctor told you that someone was dying and then they pulled through in the end, they probably weren't dying. And to be fair, it can be very hard to tell sometimes. Now, my description of dying to you is one that mainly describes people who are dying of an illness over a period of time, because that's how most people die these days. But some people do die suddenly of an illness, like a massive heart attack or severe infection. And, the reason they die is the movement of blood carrying oxygen and, sugar around the body. Something has interrupted that, or something has affected the ability of an organ to function correctly, compatible with life. Now, if this happens very suddenly, someone can obviously fade away and go into that deep sleep as they become more and more unwell suddenly. So dying suddenly of an illness isn't too dissimilar, it's just a far more rapid process. Obviously, if you die quickly of an acute illness like a heart attack or a massive brain hemorrhage, the way you die is going to be more sudden, and you won't go through all these same processes. Whether or not the illness that was killing them suddenly was painful is another story, but the dying process in that scenario isn't necessarily painful or uncomfortable. It's just sudden. So this whole dying process I've described, where your organs slowly shut down and you become more sleepy, this is what I call active dying. Actively dying can take hours to days, sometimes a couple of weeks. For the most part, most people don't die an uncomfortable death. One of the main reasons people have a bad experience when they're dying is because of the anxiety or the fear. Anxiety can be conscious and subconscious. We have effective treatments to control people's symptoms. And it doesn't matter what organ is failing, we can usually help you, be it pain, breathlessness, anxiety, vomiting. It's really difficult to describe how you know when someone is dying, but it goes deeper than looking at the specific signs I've talked about already. You have that sixth sense. It does speak to that idea or belief of that soul, in someone, and it's communicating with your soul, your subconscious. I may, for example, come into work in the morning and find out a patient's passed away, and one of the junior doctors might be surprised. Oh, he was making progress yesterday, his blood tests were improving, he was quite awake and chatty, he ate a bit. Well, sometimes people perk up just before the end, weirdly enough. Sometimes, even though we get on top of an illness, it's too late and that person has already started to die and our body's shutting down. Part of the reason that person was perking up towards the end was because they're not using their last reserves of energy and, blood supply with the organs they no longer need. They're just sending it to their brain, for their conscience to experience the last moments in this world. The priorities become different when you're dying, and therefore your body adjusts to that. You no longer want to eat, you no longer need to go to the toilet. You're just focusing on your conscience and your senses. I've had times where I've had patients who were, very comfortable physically, mentally, and they fade away into that deep sleep coma as they're dying. And when their distressed and unprepared family arrive, they cry and become distressed, and they create a negative atmosphere in the room. Sometimes, the patient can become restless all of a sudden, and, understandably, the relatives become worried and they say, oh, they might be in pain, can you give them something? And people don't realise that hearing is the last sense to go, and actually their pain and distress is actually making the dying patient, suffer pain and distress. And they're showing that unintentionally or intentionally through their body, with their subconscious or conscience, just moving, because that's all they can do when they're in that deep comatose state. So I'll tell families like that to remain strong and speak positively and hold their hand and show them that they're there for them while they're dying. And, sometimes if that is the reason why they're becoming restless, then, that can help, and, the agitation can go away and they can slip away peacefully. I think the agitation when someone is dying is one of the main reasons that people get distressed when they're watching their loved one die. The pain and other symptoms, they tend to manifest and be more apparent when the patient is conscious. And then as they become unconscious, if they have symptoms, it can just present as the agitation. The agitation is driven by the subconscious or the conscience of that person who just can't do anything or move at that point. This is terminal agitation, but terminal agitation is generally a term that we reserve for patients who have it really, really bad. I think one of the main drivers to terminal agitation, or just, distress and dying generally, is people who haven't had a chance to come to terms with the idea of their mortality. They feel that they don't have control over their dying or their death, and their wishes and preferences may not have been fulfilled because they didn't have the opportunity to think about these things and communicate them. Facing your mortality and facing these ideas is one of the steps we all need to take to ensure we have an easier death. Another couple of examples of how incredible the mind is and how it plays a crucial role in someone's ability to stay alive is when someone can outlive the illness that's trying to kill them because of the willpower. They could have, for example, a loved relative who's coming from another country, and they could be hours away from dying, but the relative's on their way anyway, and they manage to hold on for a whole day or two, and then the moment they get there and they're with them for a few minutes, they can then let go and die, because their body could only hold out for so long and they managed to do it. And I am talking about an unconscious, comatose, dying patient. Or those who, wait for their loved ones to come and visit, say their goodbyes, and then the moment they leave the door to go to the toilet or to leave or whatever, the patient will die then because they didn't want them to be there when they died. It's very interesting. Just telling someone that they have cancer and they could have a prognosis of a few weeks or months, just knowing they have that incurable cancer and not coming to terms with that idea, not coming to terms with their mortality, it can cause such psychological distress that they just switch off and shut down, and they just sort of die as way quicker than you expect. And it's almost like the illness didn't kill them, it's the psychological pain and upset. It just made their body shut down and they die a lot quicker and unexpectedly. Conversely, you can have someone who's really determined to be really fruitful with their last weeks or months of life with their illness, and they can outlive that prognosis you were expecting simply because they had so much drive and they stayed so positive. I think dying is a hugely spiritual process, and your consciousness, it definitely has a huge role on your body's ability to function and keep going even in, the very end of your life when it's unable to go any longer. If you're fearful of death, all I can say is the more you think about it, the easier it becomes. Tell your loved ones your wishes, where do you want to be when you die? If you're really unwell and disabled and suffering and you weren't able to communicate, would you want to be kept alive being treated for all these illnesses that you get towards the end? So anyway, I hope this video wasn't all doom and gloom and it was enlightening in some way. So please like, subscribe, comment, share, all of that stuff, because it really helps this channel to grow, and I love talking about these subjects. There's so much more to talk about. Look out for part 2 of this video where I talk about the specifics of dying, what it's like to die, how people die, where people die, and how we can improve end-of-life care for people. So this is Medicine with Zaid. Thank you for watching, and remember, stay safe and be kind.